Hi everybody, welcome to our further lecture series here at Northwind, and well, it's going to be a great day today. All right, get ready, buckle up. Brent's here, Horvath from Intrinsic. He's brought all the plants with. He's laying out a garden here for us, and he's working with his introductions. And through the process, he's going to explain how these introductions make sense relating to each other, and the quality of the introductions beyond the plant that they have come from, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So Brent, thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Really, yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
A great show, and we're actually going to take care of it because that's our responsibility to be good parents after he gets it in. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, fellow gardeners, plant lovers. My name is Brent Horvath. I have a wholesale perennial nursery in Hebron, Illinois. We're growing perennials to sell to retail garden centers, landscape companies, public gardens, private gardens, golf courses, municipalities. And I'm also a breeder of new perennials. So I'm developing new plants to come into our gardens and to be sold to gardeners that want to be successful. I want to thank Northwind and especially Roy for inviting me to build, layout, design a garden at Northwind that they will care for and maintain lovingly. He's one of my main mentors as far as gardening and plants goes. So it's a very much a pleasure and honor to build a garden here and be able to watch it grow. So Roy chose the spot, and I decided I would stick with low growing, kind of primarily native and plants that are attractive to pollinators. And in front of me is a big bed of Dishampsia cespitosa gold tau, translated to gold dew. It's a great short meadow type grass. Dishampsias are native to the US. I do believe mostly in the West. They like moist soil, but they are quite adaptable to a wide range of conditions. They can go into shade, they can go moist to average soil, and right now is when they're budding and blooming and kind of creating that great effect that they have in the garden, which is a cloud of kind of golden flowers. So it makes a really nice background to color and things coming up through it. And so I'm going to be using it in 2 of the 3 beds to kind of tie it into that existing bed. And the way I typically work is I take a picture of the site, ideally once it's prepped. I've come out a couple times, once before it was prepped, once after it was prepped, talked to Roy about it, and of course he had very little comment and just said, okay, looks good. So I have a picture of it, of the space before it was kind of prepped, and there were still some other plants in there. I sketch on the picture, and then I make my plant list. So I typically look at the site, I pick plants that I want in that site, and then I lay them out, is how I typically design. I don't typically do like just a flat kind of design with no kind of dimension to it. So I'm going to start laying out the plants, and I'll talk about them as I lay them out. So I'm looking to the north, so it's going to be lightly shaded but open, mostly canopy. So good light, despite being lightly shaded, partly shaded. So all these are going to tolerate that kind of condition. And so I'm going to start with some of these punctuation plants. So some of the taller plants that will pop up through the short grasses. So this is a natural one. This is a eupatorium, so it's related to Joe Pye weed, called Milk and Cookies. And it has this reddish purple new growth, has a milky white flower, very attractive to pollinators. Roy likes to call it cookies and cream. And it is native to wet areas, but it will tolerate an average soil. So I'm going to have this kind of backed up by the green foliage of the trees. We've got a wafer ash, great plant, native, tough as nails, and a white pine. So let's punctuate with those. And so this was a plant I saw on the side of the road, and I collected seed. I grew out that seed, and I selected this one as one that was very dark and showy. Then we started taking cuttings. So we'll take a stem with some leaves, we'll put it in soil and root it, and then we have a clone or a variety vegetatively produced to share and to use in gardens. So we have Agastache Blue Fortune, a great hybrid. Does happen to be sterile, but it's still a great pollinator plant. Has nectar, does not have seeds, so it's very kind of static in the garden. One of the parents, funiculum, will freely reseed in the garden. So that's one reason to use Blue Fortune instead of the other native Agastaches that are fertile. And it's very long blooming, very trouble-free. It's in the mint family. It has a square stem, lavender blue flowers for about 2 months. Nice presence in the garden, growing about 18 to 24 wide, around 3 feet tall. Nice fragrant foliage, smells like black licorice. So at this point, I usually forget the design I made, because things change when you're out here in person, and they don't always fit what you put on paper. Very common design issue. One of the species or parents is native on the edge of the woods, so they are light shade, part shade tolerant, but typically grow in full exposed sun. This is another one of those taller plants. You might not notice it now in a container, but they've been pinched once. It's a new aster called Thunderdome. Also a hybrid with fragrant or aromatic Aster oblongifolius, which tend to be lavender blue, fragrant foliage, which keeps deer from browsing, and the New England Aster. So it has the purple color of the New England Aster, like Purple Dome or the species. It does have hybrid vigor. They're growing around 3 to 4 feet tall, so it's a big one. Okay. So I only have 3 of these on this side, and then we will have 3 more over in the next section. Okay. moving right along. Now what we basically have are shorter plants, including the Deshampsia gold tau. So I'm going to start with the edge. I want to kind of soften the stone edge, and so I'm going to be putting the bulk of the short plants on that edge and then fill in with the Deshampsia. If you want to smell the foliage on the aster, you can pass it around.
Thank you.
So in this case, we're using a 2.5-inch plug Roy has supplied. And these plants mature to kind of an 18-inch plus width. They're typically dark green in the garden. And then, like I had mentioned, the goldish flowers are right around 24 inches plus or minus. So it's a pretty substantial plant. I may not even need 32 in this space. And I don't probably have to lay out all 32, but once I have the short edgers in, Deshampsia will fill in all the holes, up to the trees, up to the calamagrostis, and underneath the kind of edge of the white pine. So this is a blue calamintha. Calamintha last year was Perennial Plant of the Year for the PPA Association, which is basically people that are in the perennial trade. This happens to be a mix of blue flowering calamintha. It is fertile, so it will reseed. The Perennial Plant of the Year last year is the Calamintha nepeta, virtually infertile, no seedlings, never really an issue in the garden. It appears white. In cool weather it turns to light blue. So I kind of have them mixed. I'll have the white with the blue along the edge. These are going to grow roughly the same size, so around 18 inches by 18 inches or so in the garden. Very long blooming, great pollinator plant, hard to beat. One of the top handful of pollinator plants in the garden situation. Always covered and always has pollinators, lots of them. This is an aster called Arrested Development. It's a short one, and has a nice lavender blue flower. One of the parents is Aster laevis, which is typically growing in dry soil, kind of a sky blue color, but quite variable in nature. This seedling happened to be extra short, so it does likely have a second species as a parent, probably New York aster. Anything you see in a purple pot is something I've developed. It was just a way for us to distinguish the plants I had developed in the nursery situation, but it's kind of stuck with us and it's somewhat of a trademark. So these are only growing around a foot tall in the garden and a foot plus wide. So I want to leave some space for the Deshampsias. That's the other thing about designing a garden on paper, is you might have too many plants. I might have maybe one too many on the calamintha, The Shamsia we'll use as needed. We might not use the whole flat of 32. And so I'm going to just talk about a couple more plants I have in the garden we haven't looked at yet. One is a Solidago hybrid again. So it's called Sugar Kisses. Sugar Kisses is a hybrid between two different Solidagos. One that grows in upland dry situations, has white petals, and is very kind of picky as far as drainage and soil. So it likes to be on the dry side. The other parent grows in wet situations and has gold flowers. So the result has a white petal, creamy yellow center, and is very adaptable. It can go from dry situations into moist situations. I prefer it on a drier, leaner soil. It has a tighter habit, kind of stands up straight, 18 to 24 inches tall. Each stem is a kind of little bouquet of these little daisy-like flowers. So it looks more like an aster than it would a Solidago. One of my favorite plants. It's only been on the market a couple of years. Has this kind of grassy foliage, and it can be used as a cut flower, both in bud. Thanks to Roy. Roy pointed that out at the nursery, that it looks just as good in bud. And there is a bud here. And hopefully it's available at retail as well. So these cut in a vase last about a week plus. And there is the bud. It's kind of a limey green to yellow. Okay, one more plant to talk about here is Irrigrostis, purple lovegrass. It's another low-growing, dry-loving native grass. So it has a pink cloud, kind of August into September, growing around 18 inches tall, 24 inches wide. Up until that point, it doesn't really look like much. It can look weedy. It will also typically reseed into dry, kind of rocky situations. It can grow on the side of the road in gravel, along the highway, but it's pretty showy in flower. That pink cloud is quite impressive when it's blooming. Up until that point, maybe not. Okay. I think I'm going to step back and look at it. So this next garden is kind of the smallest space I'll be working on. So a smaller plant palette, and it will be hot noon sun relatively soon. Then some light shade from the white pine, and then a kind of sunsetting exposure. I'm going to start with the Sandhill big little blue stem. It's a little blue stem that acts and almost looks like a big blue stem. So it's a newer selection of mine, new this year. Has this kind of powder blue foliage, wider than the species, and grows around 4 feet tall, and kind of a vase to V shape habit. And I have it kind of in this hole where the light is going to pour through. Then we have a few more Aster Thunderdome, one of my new favorites. That'll kind of fill in this big hole. Then we have lots of this Rudbeckia called Sweet as Honey. So Sweet as Honey has a more yellow petal It's a very short form compared to the other rudbeckias that are available on the market in perennial. It has a very kind of upright habit with a short little skirt of fine, hairy foliage, disease resistant, very drought tolerant. I have it in a gravel garden at the nursery and it's just looking perfect. Even in this drought, we haven't watered it. Looks just as good as these container plants, which are getting irrigated twice a day, every day.
Is it deer resistant?
I wouldn't say resistant, depends on the site, but if you have deer pressure, not likely. The hairiness of the stem and the foliage can deter browsing, but it's not going to keep them away necessarily. So I have the yarrow kind of on the edge. This is a yarrow called Peter Cottontail, and it's got that white, almost baby's breath like flower, kind of finishing now, so more July bloom, but you can cut it back and get some rebloom. Then we have some Amsonias. So Amsonia is kind of gonna soften this corner on the white pine. And lots of Calamintha, more blue Calamintha, more Dishampsia gold cow. And then starting to go into this next bed and garden, we'll start with Monarda, Bradburyana, Midnight Oil. Another punctuating plant, and one of the most exciting at this time of year, is a Liatris ligulostylus. And this one is a strain that I developed for being shorter. So typically these are going to grow 5 plus or minus feet in the garden. We're selecting and collecting seed on short forms. So they're 3 to 4 foot tall, not quite as imposing. But the beauty of this magical plant is it has a pheromone in the flower. And that pheromone, once the butterflies smell it, is very attractive, and they are on the plant. So it's like magic. I used to bring these to a farmer's market, and within a half an hour, the butterflies show up. So next week when these open, you'll have butterflies, monarchs in this garden. This species is the one that's most kind of reliable and available. There is another species called Scariosa that blooms just after. I have it in a garden with this, and it does attract them. I only have one plant in the garden. Doesn't seem to be as attractive. I do believe there's some kind of regionality to that. There's a phlox called Genus. It came from the East Coast. In the East Coast, it draws the swallowtail, the yellow swallowtail butterfly, very easily and common. I haven't seen that here in the Midwest. I don't know why, but does seem to be somewhat regional in that regard and in that plant. There's the yellow swallowtail. Okay, some blue Calaminthas around, and I'll probably pop in those white ones. This is a Penstemon digitalis selection. It has near black foliage and stems, white and pink bicolor flowers, strongly attractive to hummingbirds and other pollinators. Lots of bumblebee activity on these. These bloom in June on a typically 3 to 4 foot stalk. Has a nice seed head going into fall, and can reseed in the garden, but that's up to you. You can either deadhead it. Excuse me?
Is that Dark Towers?
It is not. It's to be released, so I'm not sharing the name. But our closest would be like Pocahontas. So it would be reddish, purple. This one's a little darker still.
What's the name of it again, please?
Penstemon digitalis, dark form, is on the list. They should have Pocahontas available here. Roy does like to use it. He used it at the Arch Garden at the Art Institute in Chicago. And, but it's similar to Dark Towers. Maybe a little deeper and darker foliage. Into the third bed, kind of tie them together. And I do believe I covered all the plants over there. One of the plants I moved from over there to here is this Amsonia called Basins Loaded. Probably my favorite Amsonia. It has that intermediate foliage, so it's not a broadleaf like a Tabernet Montana. It's not a needle like Hubrichtii. It has a bluer flower, shorter, rounded habit. So when I say shorter, this one's going to grow around 30 to 36 inches tall and about 42 inches or more wide in maturity, depending on site. Bluer flower, blooms May into June, yellow fall color, and pretty substantial plant. So kind of shrub-esque in the garden. So it's going to take up some room. Potentially, I will do some limbing up of this Crataegus, kind of let more light in, kind of even it up, give that Baptisia some more light. Okay, I have a tallish grass. So I'm going to use more of the little blue stem sandhill. Another kind of punctuating plant I added as I was driving home from Ohio on Tuesday. This grows on the side of the road. It's an Asclepias, so it's in the milkweed family. Blooming now with white, kind of creamy white flowers. In the side of the road, or in the middle of the road, middle of the highway I should say, it makes these big patches. And because it's a milkweed, it's attractive to butterflies and other pollinators and can take a wide range of conditions. And it's a nice punctuation. It'll kind of fill in around other items. From my private collection. Okay. I also brought instead of bringing seed, I brought a seed flat Verbascum shaxii album. I have this in my front home meadow, which is basically unmown turf, where we have planted in other perennials and grasses and sedges and a few shrubs as well. The beauty of this plant is it moves around from seed and fills in holes. Very attractive to bumblebees, other pollinators, not native, but blooms a very long time. One of the longer blooming perennials that is hard to find and hard to source in retail, except maybe a specialized garden center like Northwind. So I'm going to leave that there. It could virtually go anywhere and it will find its way around through seed. I could also take a portion of the existing seed head and just throw it around. Now this will probably get mulched after it's planted, but if you throw some seed around, it'll naturally germinate and start to grow. Little trick of the trade. Here I am working a lot with this beautiful chocolatey bronze Monarda bradburyana. It's called Midnight Oil. In most regards, it's just like the species. It was selected for kind of propagation and production purposes. This one is less disease prone in propagation, where we're misting every day, twice a day, or all day, or overhead irrigating twice a day, every day. This one stays clean and green, kind of an olive green color with that new growth above it. And it has the typical light pink flower with the wine colored spots. Blooms in June and does not get mildew. Great plant, growing naturally in kind of dry woods on the edge of the woods, shade to light shade, but will tolerate full sun conditions. So I'm going to be laying a bunch of these out. However, because they're a deep 50 plug, we could either cut the tray apart or we have to lay them down on the ground exposed where they could dry out. So I won't be laying all those out before the garden is finished, but I will have some maybe small patches of it.
Talk about how to install those?
Yeah, so auger is a really nice way. You get a drill bit that is just slightly bigger than that size. You drill a hole, drop it in, step on it without breaking the stem, water it in, and away you go. Next one. Very fast, efficient way to plant a lot of plants. Pulmonium Heaven Sent. Another plant I created. So Pulmonium Heaven Sent has a parent that's native to the US, Pulmonium reptans. It grows in dry shade, tough as nails. And I took a plant from Japan with a grape-scented purple flower, crossed those, hybridized those, and the result was Heaven Sent Pulmonium. And has a nice kind of dark foliage as it emerges in spring, blooms early, late April through May with a grape-scented blue flower. And then you have that ferny foliage afterwards. One of my favorite creations. The bulk of the rest, except for these two plants, are low grasses. So we already talked about the purple lovegrass, Irrigrostis spectabilis, pink flower August, September. Coleria macrantha is a native June grass, typically growing on dry to well-drained or gravelly soil. If you know Karl Forester, it looks quite similar to a miniature Karl Forester. Everybody knows Karl Forester, but they don't know this plant. So, looks good. Blooms in June, and then it goes to this tan seed head, just like Karl Forester. And it's a great kind of matrix grass popping up through other low things. And a lot of these plants that I love and have used and grow are growing in nature together. This Coleria probably grows with the Irrigrostis and Rudbeckia missouriensis naturally. Potentially some of those asters, the Liatris, the Asclepias. To really tie in the edge, I will probably use some more Deschampsia Gold Tau. I have a flat here. I won't use the whole thing. And I think we're down to our last two plants, which are part of this garden. So one of them is an allium called Big Beauty. And this should be available at retail. If you know Allium Summer Beauty, which thanks to Roy, pretty much everybody does. This one has a larger, wider grade foliage, but otherwise quite similar in the garden. That kind of soft pink, or depending on who you are, lavender color. And just a little larger in flower, a little taller in flower. So more of the 24-inch size in the garden, but otherwise quite a similar look to Summer Beauty. And these I will almost use like a grass matrix. It'll be an allium matrix or allium base to all these that are already laid out. And last but not least is an Eryngium yuccifolium, which is common name rattlesnake master. This one is a seed strain, so we grow it exclusively at Intrinsic from our own seed. And the big difference is that it's shorter compared to the species. The species is growing kind of 5-foot average, depending on site and situation. This one only grows 3 feet tall. Thinner, bluer foliage as well. Very attractive to pollinators. And just a super long-lived, trouble-free plant. We have some that have been in the garden easily, I do believe, 21 years. So, and they virtually look the same. They're a little bigger, they might be a little shorter in this drought, but other than that, it's a great plant and one you should have in your garden if you want pollinators. Comes through drought without even batting an eye, and it's native. Well, thank you. If you have questions, I can answer them now or after we're done.
Brent, can you repeat the question when it's asked?
Sure.